Oh, you definitely needed to be one strong mofo. Like you had to. There was. I remember when I was, and Louie made no special treatment. So when you came in, he threw me within I think the first week with Chuck Vogelpole, and we were doing rack pulls.
Welcome to the Optimum Human Podcast, the show that interviews the world's top experts in fitness, nutrition, mindset, and beyond. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of the Optimum Human Podcast. Today we've got Mike Salemi on the line. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And Brian, how are you doing today, sir?
Fantastic.
Awesome. I was a little too enthusiastic. I don't believe you, but
I'm doing quite well this morning. So,
well, I'm actually glad to hear that.
yes. How are you doing, Claude?
You know what? I'm doing okay. I'm very appreciative of what I've got and the sunshine and stuff. But anyway, we're not here for us. We're here for Mike. So Mike, if somebody asks you what you do at a party, what would you tell them? Just for our listeners who might not be familiar with you.
Mm-hmm. So if I were to give kind of my elevator pitch of kind of who I am and what I do, it really focuses a lot around kettlebell teaching, kettlebell instructing, presenting, but at the same time, as much as it is focused on kettlebells, the technique aspect, it is very much sharing a holistic viewpoint of how to integrate kettlebell training with balancing the entire person. So an integrated approach of kettlebell training and of really strength culture as a whole.
Awesome. And how did you get into kettlebells?
When I was training at a gym in Columbus, Ohio, called Westside Barbell, approximately almost about 10 years ago. And Louie Simmons is the owner of that gym. And at that time, they were using kettlebell to supplement. It's a powerlifting gym out there, and they were using it to supplement all their training. And I believe whether it was a few months or maybe up to a year or so before, I believe it was either Steve Cotter or Pavel had come out and kind of shared their philosophy on hard style training and hard style conditioning. So when I went out there, Louie had gotten a full set of bells, the cast iron Russian bells, and
Nice.
we were using it to add to our training, and it was very, very basic stuff. I think I only was doing the swing, possibly. I don't think we did anything else, no get-ups, no snatches, nothing else like that. But it was typically towards the end of the workout that we would use them. And as soon as I got home, I was like, I gotta find me some of these because I really enjoyed some of the qualities that they were able to develop in a relatively short amount of time, the amount of really space saving, how small of a space you can train with bells. So as soon as I got back, I got a full set. They were real cheap. They weren't kind of fancy like the Dragon Door cast iron bells, but they did the job. And so that's really where I got introduced. And then as soon as I got back, I started looking at what certifications were available and where could I really develop my knowledge base even more. So it started at Westside. And then from there, I started taking more certifications through the different organizations and kind of going from there.
So you said you were with Westside. Were you always into fitness?
I was a gymnast since I was, I believe, 8 to 10 years old is when I started gymnastics. My brother started when he was 5, and we're really tight. We're real close. So he kind of got me into gymnastics at a really young age. So I've always been into health, fitness, and wellness since real little.
Wow, that's a fantastic base for pretty much any sport. Gymnastics are like those guys are super strong.
Right?
Yeah, I'm trying to get to like maybe 5% of a like state level gymnast. So maybe in a couple years I'll be like halfway there.
Right.
It's harder when you're older, but yeah,
It totally is, but my feeling is you're exactly right. Starting at a young age, I don't think if and when I do have children, I firmly believe that it'll be gymnastics and or a combination of probably Brazilian jiu-jitsu that I put my kids in just for whether they pursue it or not. but just in those key developmental years, it can be huge for the development of the entire person, especially athletic-wise, moving forward.
I completely agree. And there's a social aspect, but the preparation for your body and your mind is amazing.
Right. Totally.
Now, Brian, did you have any questions about a few questions back? I saw you
Right.
kind of steamrolled past everything.
Yeah, no, I actually had a question. I don't even know if you know this, the answer to this or not. What is the history of kettlebells?
I've heard a bunch of different stories. I even saw, I'm trying to think way back when, I've even seen like pictures of Shaolin monks training with, it wasn't particularly a kettlebell, but it was using if you've ever seen like an old temple, they would have these gigantic locks on the temple doors.
Okay, yep.
And it resembled more or less a kettlebell. And so I've seen pictures and writings of Shaolin monks using those for, training modalities. So I think it goes way, way back then. But in terms of more of like a modernist day viewpoint on where the bells came from my understanding, they were used as kind of a weight and measuring system, right? To measure out sacks of grains and such like that. And then the old time strongmen used to use them for conditioning. And then really the modern day kettlebell movement started with, I believe it was sometime in the 70s. And what I'm speaking to right now is the Kettlebell Sport movement, because Kettlebell Sport in and of itself is one of the main conditioning modalities that is used to train the Russian military. Mm-hmm. So to test fitness, to test readiness, they use kind of the Kettlebell Sport lifts as well as the sport paradigm to condition their athletes. So sorry to interrupt.
And for listeners who aren't familiar, what are those lifts?
Mm-hmm. Classically, there's two main lifts you can compete in. And when I speak about that, I'm talking about males, but today females can compete no problem. The events are slightly different, but for males, the professional class involves two 32-kilo kettlebells, and you can take a combined score of a 2 kettlebell jerk combined with a single kettlebell snatch. Each one of those events are done for 10 minutes nonstop. You can definitely set the bell down, but as soon as you do, the set's over. So the combination of those two, and there's kind of a formula as it relates to the snatch, but essentially the combination of those two is called biathlon. And then the second event that you can compete in is the one that I compete in, and that's called long cycle, which is essentially just a continuous kettlebell clean and jerk accomplished for 10 minutes nonstop without setting the bells down. And it's as many repetitions as you can reach within 10 minutes with two 32-kilo bells.
Sounds easy enough.
Right.
Claude, have you ever tried that? I believe you're familiar with Agatsu, and you've gone through that a little bit. Have you tried any of that stuff?
You know what? I pretty much anything after 3 reps, I think I'm allergic to it. My body just gives up. I fall on the ground. The stuff, like, I think it's sweat. It starts coming out of my skin, and I'm just like...
That's tears, Claude. That's tears.
It might be tears also. But no, I've tried... like a little bit, like I've done like swings for volume and some snatches for volume, but not much clean and jerking, and I've not done it for over 5 minutes or anywhere close to 10 minutes. So it's a little niche.
It totally is, but one of the cool things that they're doing now is just to appeal to a larger audience. They're actually incorporating 5-minute sets. So if you wanted to enter in a 5-minute competition, you can do that no problem. And then, because the sport definitely is a niche sport, but it is growing, there's multiple organizations that kind of each organization more or less kind of specializes in their style of competition. And so there's one organization is called Bolt, and it's kind of like an Ironman of sorts. Okay. You can enter in 5-minute events. You can set the bell down. So it really brings down the barrier to entry, and we're seeing more CrossFitters get involved and just general fitness enthusiasts.
Yes, yeah, I think that would be something more up my alley, because 10 minutes of punishment when I hate anything past 30 seconds, It's rough. I mean, Brian just likes to torture himself throughout his entire life.
God,
Maybe
you
that'd be
have no
more.
idea the truth in that, but anyways.
Oh man.
Right.
So you're a master of sport, right? In the long cycle.
That's correct. Yep.
Now, what does that mean for people who do not know what that is?
So in my weight class, which right now I'm running pretty light. My weight right now is I think around I'm a little under 170. So I'm in the 78 kilo weight class as it stands currently. And depending on the weight class, there's a certain number of repetitions that you have to achieve to qualify for the Master of Sport ranking. Now, there
Mm.
is one ranking above Master of Sport, and in the U.S., I believe only two American men have hit it yet. So it's very, very, very rare to hit that. But Master of Sport is one of the highest rankings you can achieve. And for my weight class, that entails 48 repetitions continuous with double 32 bells.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
That's a
impressive.
lot of punishment. Now, how do you condition your hands? Because each time I use a kettlebell for longer than I don't know, like 30 seconds, my hands get all torn up, and maybe it's just because I've got thin skin. Brian would probably say, yeah. Um, but how do you condition your hands and your body for something that long?
You know, it's funny you say that. I'm looking down at my hands right now, and they're looking okay. They're taken care of for sure. So I do a lot of hand grooming. But even just last night, I was laughing because at dinner, I picked up some really, really hot squash right out of the oven, and my buddy was just looking at me like I was nuts. He's like, "What are you-" I was like, honestly, man, I don't feel any of this. I don't feel. I walked it all the way through the kitchen to the table, set it on his plate, and so how do I condition them? Um, Really, it becomes more challenging when I do double and triple days. I don't do 3 days too often, but one of the things that's really helped in terms of kind of a tip to kind of share out there is, and this is something that Paul had shared, Paul Chek had given me a while back, is I'll typically, if you get like a Dixie cup, for example, if you fill it maybe three quarters of the way with water, freeze it, and then after it's fully frozen, cut off the bottom of it, and then use that essentially as like a massage tool to massage your calluses and massage your hands and bring in some nice yin energy to the hands. And when I do that in between trainings or even after trainings, that really helps them bounce back pretty quickly. And in terms of a conditioning style, I do a ton of farmer's walk. So almost every single training at the end is always a farmer's walk conditioning series. And for example, the other day at the end of training was about 4 minutes, 4 minutes nonstop with double 40s, farmers walking. So there's a progression that I kind of use, but a lot of farmers walks is probably my most hated and my best friend right now.
And that's 40 kilos, right?
40 kilos each, yeah, so 80 kilos total.
Right. It's a pretty hefty weight. I like it.
It's over your 30-second threshold there, Claude. I don't think you would like it.
Hey, I lift them down. I lift them up, put them down once or twice. I'm good with that, you know.
Right.
I leave the gym. I brush off my hands, brush off my shoulders, and I'm happy.
Good. So
Now, I'll let you go, Brian.
all right. So
This once.
Mike, I appreciate that. So I know you do the long cycle, and there's so many different things that can be done with kettlebells. What would be your one or two kind of beginning exercises for people utilizing the kettlebells?
I think a really common mistake when people are getting new to kettlebell work is they want to hop right into obviously the most foundational movement, more or less, which is the swing. And even though that is really what the bell, in my opinion, is really designed for,
Mm-hmm.
is swing movements or variations or progressions off of the swing, clean, snatch, etc. Most people make the mistake of jumping into that too quickly without having a proper base. So when I say that, it starts with obviously flexibility, mobility, strength, and then going into power movements. So taking a step back before the swing, making sure the person can just effectively deadlift and perform a nice squat pattern, first without the bell, then with the bell. So in terms of beginning exercises, it would be just a deadlift. And then once someone's comfortable with that and they've worked on the other foundational qualities, that's going to allow them to progress more safely throughout the bell work. Then just the beginning exercise would be, the swing, which is where everything starts. So just a two-handed swing.
Mm-hmm.
Right on.
Cool. Yeah, I know that a lot of people are very weary of the swing because it can put a lot of strain on the low back. But yeah, it's all about conditioning before getting in and make sure that you can stabilize the back and the core.
Right. And even just to add to that, when we talk about swing, I think there needs to be a distinction needs to be made because, obviously a swing is more or less pretty self-explanatory, right? Like the bell just swings between your legs and swings to somewhere around chest height, and we can call that a swing. But depending on what the intention is of the person or what quality of what biomotor ability they're trying to develop, you can swing in a multitude of different ways. And for example, I'm just going to use the name, just a hard style swing or a classically foundational based swing is going to look really, really different than what we use classically in the sport, right? There's two completely different goals. One is the ultimate expression of power production, a very simple movement, relatively speaking. And then the other one is going to be the ultimate expression of power conservation or energy conservation. So even though maybe a new person to bell work might not be too hip to what's the differences, but once you actually go through them yourselves and you experience and you lay down enough swings, each one is very different. So I tend to want to know a little bit more as to what are the goals of the individual, what are they trying to accomplish with their bell, and that's really going to dictate what type of swing that they evolve into. But regardless, I do feel that having that foundation of a deadlift, a squat pattern, and then entering in a more foundational swing, regardless of what the goal is in the very beginning, is the best way to go.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't want to do 10 minutes with hard style swinging.
No. Have you ever done a snatch test? I don't know if have you ever done one of those, like with kind of the hard style snatch test that they do, typically 5 minutes or so?
It's in the level 2 Agatsu, so it's maybe one of the reasons I haven't taken the test yet. But I've not, no.
Okay. It's interesting if you do observe, and I don't know exactly what Agatsu, what Sean Moes and how he kind of runs it, but it's really interesting that even if you observe a 5-minute snatch test, what starts off as quote unquote hard style or a more, let's say, hinge dominant swing, as the lifter fatigues, if you observe the breathing pattern, if you observe the pattern of the pelvis, it starts looking a lot like the sport style. There's more relaxation, the breathing tends to change, there's more of a scoop, more or less. So naturally, that style of lifting is not conducive to, let's just say, just as a rough estimate, like more than 10 or so repetitions per set. So you'll start seeing just natural compensation and natural changes happening in the lifting pattern as someone approaches. Because a 5-minute snatch test is a ball buster. I mean, that's brutal, yeah. no matter what style you're doing.
No, for sure. And it can be equated to sprinting, right? You can only sprint for so long before you have to slow down into a jog, right? And that's kind of what I see as more kettlebell sport. Because if you're going hard, if you're sprinting the whole time, I mean, either you're a mutant or you're gonna burn out and die, crash. I mean, you might be a mutant, you don't know. But I just had a question. We were talking about swings earlier. What would you say the 2 biggest mistakes for beginners on the double hand kettlebell swing is?
The 2 biggest mistakes, technique-wise?
Yeah, technique-wise, like just form-wise, things people should look out for.
Two really, really common ones, and I hear this a lot, and not to sound like a broken record, but it really is true for very beginners who should be doing a more, let's say, a more simple movement, which is going to be a foundational or like a hinge-based swing. Mm-hmm. The first thing is just knowing how to hinge, or just how to, if we actually take that to like a primal, if talking about it in the context of a primal pattern, just learning how to bend properly. So that's really the first mistake I tend to see is people tend to turn it into more of a squat style swing.
Mm.
Which really, there's nothing wrong with that if that's the intention, more or less. But in terms of the, go ahead.
Is that like where people squat into it and then they do like a front shoulder raise?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's not really using the bell as your friend. It's more using it as a shoulder raise tool.
Right. There's a sharp end to the momentum that during the downswing, and the bell kind of just goes straight down, and the torso remains relatively vertical.
Mm.
So as opposed to learning how to actually just move the hips out of the way naturally as the bell kind of falls down. And then the second really mistake that I tend to see is just pulling with the arms on the upswing.
Now, could you explain that a little bit more thoroughly?
Sure. So as the bell swings through the hips on the upswing, the arms are essentially just the whips, right? So you want a loose but secure grip on the bell, especially if you're doing a two-handed swing. And as you're finishing the propulsion phase or the acceleration phase, which typically, as soon as the bell leaves contact from the hips, in my mind, that is when force production is over. So the foundational swing or a hinge-based swing really is completely hip dom. It's completely focused on accelerating the bell through propulsion of the hips. And as soon as those forearms, even when it's just a half an inch off the thighs, that's typically when force production ends. And from that point, the bell should be in its floating stage. So when you look at a beginner, I'm visualizing it right now, I'm sticking my hand out right in front of me, the bell should be just an extension of the hand. So if you view someone from a lateral angle or a side angle, and if you see the bell, the cannonball portion of the bell, if that is sitting lower than the hand, or if the wrist is flexed or bent to any degree, that tends to show that the lifter is pulling with the shoulders or pulling with the arms, as opposed to staying incredibly, incredibly relaxed with the arms, allowing the bell to float. So they're using muscular effort from really the smallest muscles of the body, as opposed to generating force with the largest muscles of the body being the legs and really all the muscles of the posterior chain.
Yeah, so they end up turning it into a shoulder-specific exercise.
Right.
Man, yeah, no, I've seen the same mistake too. And another big one is, do you ever see when people overswing and there's that big like arch in their back?
In the lumbar?
In the lumbar, yeah. And not only in the lumbar, but a little bit thoracic too. Like it's almost like when somebody does too much of a deadlift, they come up to neutral and then they pull back even more. I see it a lot in CrossFit because I guess their bell goes a little bit higher. It goes up to forehead height. I don't know. It's like anyway. Let's not talk too much about CrossFit. But
well, Brian, even on that topic, if I could just add one quick thing,
go for it,
please.
So I think there's also a distinction that needs to be made there too, because what you're talking is exactly correct. When we're talking in the context of beginners, that overswing, swinging into the lumbar spine for sure. And I think the better a coach is and the more advanced a lifter is, you'll tend to, one of the most, there's three real principles that I teach in the coaching system that I've developed to teach bells. And let's just use the swing as an example. There's three real technique cues or things that I like coaches to look out for. Number one is connection. So connection just means on the downswing, especially on the downswing, because when the eccentric load is the greatest, that's going to be when the back is at its most vulnerable position. So as the bell's falling, if the hips pull out too early and there's too much of a distance, there's too much of a gap between the hips and the arms, or let's just say the wrist or the lower forearms, there's an incredibly long moment arm there. So there's a lot of rotational force on the spine. There's a lot of torque on the spine. So number one is connection. So being as patient as you can with an upright torso until the forearms essentially, quote, connect to the body, and then that moment arm is drastically reduced. The second thing, and this is as it relates to what we're talking about right now, is this thing called the counterbalance. So in the swing, for example, you're always going to be working against the bell, right? So as the bell swings forward through the legs, you've got, so I weigh, let's say 170 pounds. I've got 170 pounds that in order to redirect the bell to its height, especially as the load increases, to do so safely, we want to use what's called the counterbalance. So we want to use our body weight, not just the driving off the legs. Yes, that's a huge, huge point, using the legs, but using our body, because we've got it there, to redirect the bell. So yes, there's dysfunctional technique when you swing into the low back and you see kind of this overswing position, but then it becomes really beautiful when the lifter knows how to utilize the counterbalance, especially based off the load being listed. And there should be a lean back. And I think that's, for a beginner, you have to be a little bit careful how they're doing it. But if I didn't do that, there's no way. I mentioned 232s in competition, but right now I'm competing for 10 minutes with double 40 kilo kettlebells. So as I'm going through teaching progression, or as I'm going through my training progression, if I didn't lean back and I've got bells that are heavier than myself jetting forward, there's no way I'd be able to effectively redirect the bells and still maintain my center of mass over my base of support and stay balanced and grounded, if that makes any sense.
I think it does. I mean, I'm a very visual cue person. I'm also not that bright, so it doesn't. No, but I see what you mean. But I do feel like somebody would have to get a coach before they start swinging, or at least watch like a ton of videos. But even then, you can't see what you're doing wrong necessarily.
Right. I totally agree. Yeah.
And so before I jump into some questions about Westside, because I didn't know you were with them, Brian, do you have anything?
Have at it, man.
All right. So you said you were with Westside, and how old were you when you started with those guys?
I spent a month out there when I think I was just turning 19. So yeah, 18, 19 years old.
Wow. And for people that don't know, could you describe Westside Barbell?
Sure. So Westside Barbell has been around for a long time, and Westside Barbell got their name. I recall, if I recall the story correctly, there was a gym out here in Culver City, California, and I don't know how close Louie was with them, but they were using similar methods in the very, very early days to what Louie was using. And if I recall correctly how he was explaining it to me way back when, due to that inspiration and or that connection, he wanted to carry on the name. So Westside Barbell today I'm not too familiar with it. I've kind of lost a little touch in terms of, since I've been so focused on kettlebell sport, but before
slightly different,
yeah. But before kind of Louie got into being the CrossFit kettlebell guy, it was pure powerlifting. And it is the, hands down, was and is currently the strongest gym in the world. When I was there over 10 years ago, I mean, I was there for a month, and there was, Chuck Vogopol was a 220 when I was there, and he was squatting well over 1,000. I mean, he was deadlifting, I believe, in the 8s or so. I think there was over like 50 people who have gone through Westside deadlifting over 7, close to 8, a bunch of 900-pound squatters, a bunch of 700-pound bench pressers, even more than that. So hands down, the strongest gym in the world. And what Louie's really done with that gym now, Westside Barbell is really Louie's passion and his dream, which is definitely different, if it's still the same today, than Westside Barbell, the equipment company, which essentially kind of funds the dream. So the strongest gym in the world, every lifter there when I was there was just absolutely die hard. There was no room for quote unquote the weak. I saw guys coming in, and Louie always had open doors and welcomed people with open arms. But if you couldn't hang, he would kick you out right away. Like if you were not able to hang with the training, or you were, if you were bitching or anything like that, he didn't want anything to do.
So it was more mental toughness than body strength, or did you need a combination of both? Like, did you have to squat 400 pounds before you walked in the door?
Oh, you definitely needed to be one strong mofo. Like you had to, I remember when I was, and Louie, made no special treatment. So when you came in, he threw me within, I think, the first week with Chuck Vogelpohl, and we were doing rack pulls. And so I think we were pulling at or right around knee height, roughly speaking. And especially in that cage, you could only go up by 50 kilo plates. So we're talking 110 pound increments. Man. So at that time, 19, my deadlift was a little over 600. And we go in the cage and Chuck goes, okay, let's start lifting. So I took the bar and we were just alternating, and I didn't get more than three sets in, because that was it. So, I got whatever it was, 1 plate on, 2 plate on by 3 plate. That was like 660 or somewhere around there, roughly speaking. And I pulled it, got stuck at the top, and then my set was over and Chuck was just beginning his training. So you definitely had to have the mental toughness, the commitment, and you had to at least have some solid level of strength for sure.
That is nuts. Yeah, I've seen some stuff, and Louie. Many people don't know this, that he's actually super smart and super technical in his programming. Like, a lot of people just think, oh yeah, these powerlifters, they just lift heavy shit. Like I've heard stories that the guys read Supertraining cover to cover. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, even the author. But like
Nelson,
yeah, like it's an intense book, and I heard Louie, he's ripped through it, and his articles online, like he's just, the guy's a genius, and I don't think people respect that enough.
Oh, I didn't even know that people don't know that about him.
Yeah. No. People just think Westside is just like this, the strongest gym on earth, and like that's where it ends. That's where it starts and ends. And
all brawn, no brains.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, but like, man, like Louie, he's like one of the smartest guys that at least I think that's in the fitness game right now.
Yeah, well, let me clarify that for people who aren't aware. Louie is legit. There's no way around that. I mean, he was. When I was hanging out with him, or just we would go back to his house, I mean, his whole little library is like physics textbooks, and he would bring physics books to the gym, and he would loan it out. He always encouraged, whether the lifters actually read it or not was something else. But I mean, he had a lot of his theories came from translated Russian texts on Olympic weightlifting. And so incredibly well-read person, incredibly well-studied person, and he would always encourage the guys to read, always encourage, leaving books for them. So again, whether they did it or not, but Louie in and of himself is very, very intelligent. No doubt about that.
No, for sure. And I've heard about the physics books and stuff like that before. And like, when you look at pictures of them, you don't think it, it's kind of like that, you judge the book by its cover, right? You're like, what the fuck? Like, this guy's reading, books on hardcore, like, physics or just even Supertraining. Like, that book scares me. I got it on my bookshelf, and it's like, yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's staring me down. I don't like it. Anyway, well, I do know we've got a few time constraints. So Brian, any more questions before we start leading off?
Let's head right into the rapid fire, man. That's been great, enlightening stuff so far. I'm personally not particularly versed in kettlebell, so it's been real good.
Oh, Brian, when you come to Toronto, man, I'm gonna put you through some paces.
Great.
Please do. Please put Brian through. Yeah.
He needs it. It just, oh man, you should have seen this video. He made a video of himself trying to handstand. He's like, Claude, this one's for you, because I like to play around with handstands. I'm terrible at it, which is why I love it. And let's just put it this way: it was fantastic. And hopefully the same thing doesn't happen with kettlebells, though. So,
yeah, that could get real dangerous real quick.
Falling on your face is one thing, but having a kettlebell fall into your face is slightly worse. Okay, so so be careful. Get a coach, people.
I like.
Yeah, me too. Though that would make a great viral video. So, Mike, when you think about people who inspire you, who's the person who most inspires you, or who do you respect the most? I mean, we're just talking about Louie, but like, it can be anyone that does anything. It can be a president, whatever.
Your dog.
Your dog, yeah.
She's up there. She's way up
Right,
there.
absolutely.
The person I would say right now, and it's a lot of it has to do, I'm thinking just the first person to pop in my head is really Paul Chek. Paul, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask you to elaborate on that, but it sounds like you were gonna do it anyway.
Paul, in terms of knowledge base, in terms of coaching experience, in terms of living his message, like I can't really think of. There's very few people who I can honestly say live what they preach on a day-to-day basis for as long as they're teaching, or as long as they're sharing their life's work. And so Paul to me is one of the most inspiring people. When I would go down for our sessions, I mean, it's always great information. I always come back home having learned a lot and ready to implement a lot of the new things that we discuss and we go over. But when you're around someone like Paul, a lot of the gifts, or the greatest gifts, are just being in someone's presence like that and just observing how they live, observing how they talk, interacting with someone like that. So for me, just spending time with him speaks to how much of an impact he's had on my life and how great of a role model he is for me.
Yeah, I mean, Paul's a fantastic guy. I've had the opportunity to meet him a few times, and it just, I don't know what it is about him, but you just walk away like feeling really calm and that everything's going to be okay. Like the guy just like he's got a solid aura, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just a slight follow up and detour. How did you get with Paul Chek?
I'd been studying Paul's work since I was really, I think right after I left Westside. When I was around 18, I started working as a strength and conditioning coach at a holistic lifestyle center, where the whole facility was modeled around the Chek teachings.
Wow.
So I first got exposed to his work there, but it wasn't until I started taking classes and became an HLC1, HLC2 that I started really going a little bit deeper. But in terms of our work one-on-one, which has been the past 2 or 3 years now, it was really to kind of heal an orthopedic issue, a compartment syndrome that I had in my left forearm that no practitioner and no doctor or anyone could really figure out. And especially one, figure out, and the second part is two, how to effectively rehabilitate it without going straight for surgery.
Yep.
So I reached out to Paul, and he was willing to help. And that was the driving intention. Everything else that's kind of developed and flourished from that. But the main intention was first just to heal an orthopedic injury that was holding me back for years, almost 4 years, trying to hit master of sport and falling short, getting close but falling short, and then just being left with an injury.
So you would say that. Sorry, Brian?
I said that's got to get frustrating for sure.
Yeah.
It sucks. Injuries suck.
Yeah,
Let's just say that.
They do.
Definitely. So would you say that Paul helped you push past that barrier and become master of sport? Like without him, do you think you would have been able to do it?
I asked myself that question, and I honestly, I don't think so, because the effort was always there, the discipline was always there. In terms of kettlebell sport programming, I had, quite good kettlebell sport programming. I traveled to Russia to train with the national team not too long before that. So I was exposed to kind of the highest level in terms of kettlebell sport specific programming. My conditioning level was good, but it took me 2 years visiting 9 different practitioners and spending quality time with each one. And it just got to a point where it was just financially and just emotionally just destructive and draining. So if I could have figured it out by myself or through another practitioner, I probably already, to my knowledge, already did that. So for me, I think it did take working with Paul to kind of open up some doors and open up some things to consider and really have a good plan of action of how to identify and then heal from what was going on.
Yeah, he's managed to to help a lot of people through a lot of stuff. So I'm not surprised. I mean, the guy is totally respect him. Yeah. Now, Brian, you have some follow-up questions, yes?
Yeah. Well, we're again limited on time, so I want to just hit a couple more rapid-fire questions, and then we'll call it a show. But the first one would be, you're on a desert island. What 3 books do you take with you?
Are there any other people on the desert island? Will there be people there?
Sure, it can be like Lost.
Okay. Because the reason why I say that is one of my favorite books of all time is Nonviolent Communication, but you would kind of need people to communicate with on the island.
Yes.
So, number 1 book would be Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 nonviolent communication books, right?
That he wrote, or that other?
I think there's another one that Paul Chek also recommends. It's like a little tiny like handbook.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. I don't know what the name is though.
Yeah, I think it's also something like nonviolent communication, but I'm looking for it on my bookshelf. Can't find it right now. But good choice. Good choice.
Yeah, so that would be my first one.
Okay.
Then I've probably read this book 8 times, and I could still learn a lot from it, and that's Paul's How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Right
so
on.
Every time I read that, I always learn something.
It's been a
Everybody
common
needs to
answer on
read
the
it.
show so far.
Yeah, it's like a how-to for your body. You know, it's like you should be given it when you're born, I think.
The third, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned Supertraining, and it's been such a book that I've skimmed through, or I've looked at certain parts, but man, it is so dense. But I honestly know it's so amazing. So for the duration that I would be on this desert island for however many years, I would say my goal would be to get through that book and have that book digested. So let's go with Supertraining on that one.
Oh man! All right. You can also bludgeon your enemies to death if there's ever like a coup or whatever. You could just use it to fend them off.
Yeah, but it's funny because I know exactly where that book is right now in my bookshelf, and every time I go down to sit down at the desk, I look at it and I'm like, oh man, is today going to be the day? I don't know.
It stares you down. Like you just look at it. Those are like red letters. At least mine has red lettering, and it just like looks at me. It's like, yeah, it's scary shit.
So like one of those old paintings where the eyes follow you?
Kind of, yeah, pretty much. And like it cackles at you too as you walk by. You're like, what the hell was that? Oh man,
that's scary.
Yeah, no, dude, that's how I feel about this book. And yeah, maybe one day. It's there for a reason, and I'll eventually either end up hitting myself over the head with it or reading it, but or both.
Right.
That's what the desert island's for.
Oh, exactly. So,
yeah, I'm.
He's dying of laughter.
I have no words.
He's done. He's gonna hang up now.
So, what would your definition of, or you can answer this? Who would you? Who's the first person that comes to mind that is the optimum human?
I don't know if I have someone in particular that I would say is the optimum human. I just would think of certain qualities and certain characteristics.
Perfect.
Yeah. Go for it.
I would just say, I think there's plenty of people who are incredibly healthy, strong, vital, who have a more long-term aspect of health. But what I would say is I think the ultimate test is how someone lives being, quote unquote, the optimum human for the duration of their life. So if you look at someone who maybe is in their 20s and incredibly vital, strong, and healthy, and then you also look at them 60 years later, are they still able to maintain, a relatively high quality of life, both physically as well as emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? So one of the person that just pops up into my head right now is Eugene Sandow. Now, he's more of the physical, but at the same time, if you've checked out some of his writings, like Life is Movement, for example, Eugene Sandow was an old-time strongman, You know, he even said way back then that, I don't know if this is the exact wording, but something like no man or no human can realize or achieve optimum human potential without having healthy glands and organs. So even way back when in the, you know, whether it was, I think it was the late 1800s or early 1900s that he was around and really thriving, you know, he understood that just our muscles were only as good or could only reach the expression that our organs were correspondingly healthy. So that he's one of the people that when I look at before all this, the kind of the shit supplements that were out there, I mean, he was really about whole food, real food, smart training, smart periodization. So I would say the optimum human in my mind would be someone like Eugene Sandow, and then just someone who can maintain and someone who's committed to being their highest self for the duration of their life, as opposed to, hey, you know, when I was in my 20s, I was an Olympian, or in my 30s, I was an Olympian. And then now that I'm 70, I'm just going to be a beer drinking guy who just sits on the couch and does nothing.
Yeah, it's like, you know what? I used to bench this much. It's like, yeah, great. Oh, yeah. Man, but no, that's a fantastic answer. And Eugene Sandow, he brought kind of strongman to the world from what I see. Like he's probably one of the most famous strongmen of like history, if not the most famous. He's awesome guy, and he had that like leopard suit thing, right? So it takes strength and confidence to wear that thing.
A fashionista for sure.
Now, before we take off, I know we're a little bit over time, but Mike, you said you're developing some stuff earlier. Would you just like to give a brief overview and how people can kind of find that and find you, or keep up to date?
I'd love to. Sure. So right now I'm really developing a series of workshops. It's really for anyone and everyone interested in improving their health, performance, and vitality, but it'll be most focused on kettlebell training, athlete nutrition, as well as efficient, really shoulder and spine biomechanics specifically for overhead lifting athletes and kettlebell athletes. So those are kind of my small personal projects. But also I've been working for a few years now with Paul Chek on developing a Chek kettlebell certification. And so I've been writing the manual for a while now, especially as it relates to the kettlebell portion. And the exciting part for me, at least, is as it's going to be presented with Paul, the prerequisite as we're envisioning it now, Paul's going to be creating an athlete self-management course. So really anyone and everyone before they enter in kettlebell training, which, you know, it's going to be kettlebell training through my lens. So through the experience of, you know, starting out at Westside, learning a little bit of hard style techniques, transitioning into the sport, and then being injured and rehabilitating the injuries. So it'll be a very sound approach to kettlebell training, a very holistic approach. But again, everyone coming into the course will have to have had some exposure at some level to how to really manage themselves, or how to look at least key markers of health, vitality, and wellness. So before they engage in a kick-ass program, they're going to know, like, okay, I've got to look at my sleep. I've got to look at my nutrition for my core to function. I've got to, you know, be at least hip or aware to some of the other maybe unseen factors that people don't normally consider when it comes to negative impacts to training. So if someone's super stressed, how should we modify training volume based off that, for example? So that's what really excites me, is not only the kettlebell portion, but the fact that it's going to be coupled with an athlete self-management course. And I think it's going to be something really unique, and I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Well, that's amazing. I can't wait to check it out. And I mean, I'd love to read what you've got. I mean, I won't steal it, but anyway, it might go up on my blog.
Sure.
But,
I'll keep you posted for sure.
That's awesome. But I'm also excited about that kind of the knowledge that Paul's bringing to it too, because it's so important. It's not just, you know, it's not getting in the gym and doing the workout. It's all the stuff outside of the gym that matters too, and people tend to forget that.
Totally. I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, it's been a blast.
It has.
Thank you for coming on, Mike. I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 and talk about your time in Russia. I mean, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure that could be a show in and of itself.
Yeah, vodka kettlebell challenge. I like that.
And hard-boiled eggs. Lots of hard-boiled eggs.
Oh man, all right. I'm excited now.
Yeah.
After hearing hard-boiled eggs.
I'm just thinking what the gym must have smelled like.
When that TVA fires, something else fires too. Oh.
All right. And on that note, it's been a pleasure, guys. Thanks so much for coming on, Mike, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yes, thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Optimum Human Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to head on over to iTunes and give a 5-star rating and review, which will help spread the word to more awesome listeners just like you. Head on over to theoptimumhuman.com and subscribe to the free newsletter and get the Optimum Humans Blueprint to the Optimum Life. Download it instantly. Thanks for listening.